Hey everyone, tonight we drift back in time to the hidden lives of Egyptian concubines, women who shared a king's bed, waited years for a passing glance, and mastered the art of flirting while avoiding poison in the same breath. Before you settle in, tap that like button and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these nightly tales. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's out there, maybe curled up under a blanket, cup of tea in hand, letting the world slip away. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's slip into the past together. The sun rises softly over the Nile. Birds chatter in the reeds. The palace rouses, and just as your dream reaches its dramatic peak, probably something about a shirtless scribe feeding you endless figs, you're jolted awake by a servant who informed you with suspicious cheer that you look a bit puffy this morning. Come to your new reality. Life as a royal Egyptian concubine. There's no sleeping in. The pharaoh may not visit today. He may never visit. Okay, but that's irrelevant. Your estate asset, an ornamental promise, and your body clock now belongs to the Bureau of Looking Good Before Breakfast. You're lifted from your linen sheets, scratchy but fashionable, and handed a bronze mirror. This is not kindness. It's a diagnostic. Is your complexion flawless? Are your eyebrows unruly? Do your lips still glow like lotus petals at dawn? These questions are not small talk. Your entire future hinges on whether your reflection outshines the girl snoring next to you. Stretching comes next, not for fitness, but posture. A crooked back means bad profile angles, and bad angles mean you're forgotten in the maybe later pile forever. So you pace back and forth, balancing a bowl of scented water on your head, pretending you're thrilled about it. Breakfast appears. A platter of dates, figs, maybe a single pomegranate seed, cut in half for portion control. You nibble slowly. Nothing ruins allure like chewing. Around you, the other concubines do the same, eyes flicking sideways, locked in a silent competition called who can look most effortlessly radiant while pretending they're not competing. The servant returns. She suggests a cool compress for. Your eyes code for. You look like someone told you the pharaoh prefers harpists now. You comply. The cloth smells of lavender and ambition. And so begins the day, not with splendor or triumph, but with 1,000 tiny rituals designed to make you seem effortlessly divine. You haven't spoken. You haven't left the room. We've already fought your first battle, waking up looking exactly as perfect as you did 12 hours ago. Spoiler, you'll do it again tomorrow. Bath time is not about hygiene. It's about metamorphosis. You are not a woman with sleep crust in her eyes. You are a vessel of royal potential, and that vessel must be soaked, scrubbed, shaved, and basted like a sacred goose before it's deemed worthy. The bath chamber smells like a perfumery crashed into a citrus orchard. The water is steeped with lotus petals, jasmine oil, and something called fragrance of divine intention. This is not just a bath, it's a scented baptism. Two attendants approach with sponges that are gentle yet unmistakably judgmental. They scrub you with ground natron, a salty mineral that strips away dead skin, lingering shame, and any final memories of village life. Then comes hair removal. Every strand below your eyebrows must vanish. Waxing, plucking, shaving, choose your torment. Body hair is vulgar, unsanitary, common. You grit your teeth as the wax cloth tears free. Queens don't complain. They hiss politely. Next, oiling thick almond oil poured over you by someone who only speaks in compliments. You're massaged until your skin gleams, then nearly slip off the tiles trying to stand. You've become a human candle. Perfume comes next, not sprayed, but layered. Musky base, citrus middle, floral top. You smell like a deity or a fruit basket at a royal wedding. If the pharaoh sneezes as you pass, it's not allergies, that's strategy. You're handed a clean linen shift, semi-transparent, naturally, and reminded to sit upright for an hour, so the oils settle perfectly. Translation: don't ruin the shine. Clean, not exactly prepared, is more accurate. You've completed one ritual and step into the next, assembling your face. Forget inner beauty. Divine favor depends on sharp eyeliner and cheekbones that could slice papyrus. You're seated in front of a polished bronze mirror, the ancient Egyptian ring light. The cosmetics attendant arrives with what looks like an artist's kit: powdered galena, red ochre, crushed carmine beetles. Time to become a living fresco. First eyeliner, black coal, applied with priestly precision. Not too thick, or you look embalmed. Not too thin, or you're mistaken for a scribe's assistant. The line must whisper mystery, hint at menace. You hold still as a reed stick pokes near your eyeball. One tear, and the line smudges, and smudged means weary, and weary means reassignment to folding linens for eternity. Next, lips, red ochre, mixed with animal fat. Nothing says romance like beetle paste chapstick. Your lips must look plump, yet modest. A balance no one can define, but everyone judges. Then, blush a hint across your cheeks to fake youthful vitality, even though you haven't slept properly since the last flood season. Status's exhaustion must hide behind artful rouge. A girl steps forward with an ivory eyebrow comb. Dignity, fertility, political allegiance, all shaped into two neat arcs. No one remembers why eyebrows mean so much, but they do. You nod as if you understand. Finally, perfume again dabbed behind your ears, on your wrists. Those are the places the pharaoh's fingers might brush if he ever strolls past, bored enough to notice you're now beautiful, polished, possibly flammable. You study yourself in the mirror. You look like someone painted on a tomb wall, forever offering lotus flowers to a god you might never see. A god you need now is a god who's hiring. You've been bathed, buffed, oiled, shaved, painted, peeved, praised for your glow, though someone kindly reminds you it's not quite as dazzling as yesterday's. And so, it's time for breakfast. The harem dining hall isn't exactly a bustling mess hall. It's more like a catwalk where everyone happens to be sitting down. Dozens of women gather, draped in semi-sheer linen that whispers, approachable but ambitious. They glide toward their low tables with the careful, silent precision of a crocodile stalking a heron, graceful, unhurried, and constantly sizing each other up. Your meal is elegantly meager: a plate of honeyed dates, 2 figs, and a modest spoon of yogurt. It's not enough to satisfy hunger, just enough to keep your cheekbones sharp. You eat delicately, using only 3 fingers. Forks are still centuries away. Hand gluttony is for scribes and widows, not for state ornaments like you. And this is where the passive aggression blooms. Oh, your coal is so daring today. Someone purrs across the table, her smile stretching wide, but never reaching her eyes. You thank her sweetly, while noting that her eyeliner is uneven and her left earlobe hangs slightly lower than the right. A younger girl plops down beside you and loudly announces how she was up all night practicing harp. Just in case the pharaoh felt musical. Translation: she thinks tonight might be her night. You smile, chew thoughtfully, and let a lone fig seed cling to your lip like a tiny declaration of war. Around you, gossip drifts like incense. Who cried in the baths? Who borrowed someone's perfume without asking? Who slipped out of the astrologer's quarters looking suspiciously optimistic? Everyone pretends to be unbothered. No one actually is. You know better than to rush your food. Women who eat too quickly are greedy. Women who don't eat at all are desperate for attention. The trick is to find the graceful middle, casual elegance with a side of strategic chewing. Servants, refill your cup with a splash of palm wine. Just enough to loosen the tongue. It's never enough to give someone an excuse to talk. Breakfast ends with a ceremonial toothbrushing, a chewed twig dipped in natron. You study yourself in your bronze mirror and think, one more meal survived. One more silent battle disguised as brunch. You might think, now's the time to relax. Maybe nap, maybe do something productive. Come on, you're about to enter the most draining part of your day, existing beautifully in plain sight. This isn't leisure. This is performance art. You're led to the relaxation gallery, a pleasant sounding place. Dads, really a stage set for two purposes: to look exquisite and to be seen looking exquisite. You and a few dozen other women lounge on embroidered cushions, ranged to catch the best light and flatter your profile. No slouching. Posture must convey nobility, fertility, and mild, tasteful boredom. You may pick an activity as long as it's ornamental. Reading hieroglyphs aloud. Too clever. Playing the harp. Perfect. Smelling lotus flowers while gazing at a palm tree. Excellent. Anything that radiates divine, yet available. If you're especially brave, you might risk a small flourish of accidental elegance. Let a sandal slip off while stretching. Sigh thoughtfully, as if contemplating love, politics, or your non-existent pension plan. These are miniature dramas, crafted to catch an eye without seeming to want it. Newer girls often overdo it. They pose too deliberately, all but shouting, "Pharaoh, pick me," the social equivalent of banging a temple gong. This earns polite smiles and immediate whispers. You, however, are no novice. You know the secret is not to look like you're trying. The secret is to look effortlessly ethereal while calculating exactly how much effort it's costing you. Occasionally, a scribe or messenger drifts by. You pretend not to see them. You tilt your face slightly toward the sunlight. You are a statue, pretending to breathe, a living lotus in linen. And if rumor reaches the pharaoh that the third girl on the left seemed especially enigmatic today, congratulations, your decorative strategy has worked. You've just spent 2 hours doing nothing beautifully. In this palace, that's not idleness. That's ambition. When your posture is numb and your gaze suitably misty, it's time for the educational portion of your day. So don't get excited. This is not the sort of education that comes with diplomas or job prospects. This is Concubine, school, where you learn how to be interesting enough to hold the pharaoh's attention for 6 minutes, but never so interesting that he starts wondering if women can think. You file into a sunlit chamber where instructors wait, wrapped in scholarly linen and armed with wax tablets. Today's curriculum: harp, tuning, poetry, recitation, the fine art of tilting your head while discussing dreams. Music is the crown jewel of your skill set. A concubine who can pluck a harp string just so can shuffle the entire hierarchy of the court. You learn old love songs about blooming papyrus reeds and intoxicating eyes. You're encouraged to sing them like you mean it, or at least fake it with strategic shoulder shivers. Poetry follows. Not writing it, heavens no. That's for ancient scribes with back pain. You recite it softly, eyes downcast, voice sweet. You practice murmuring lines like the moon weeps for my longing without giggling, though everyone knows the moon is far too busy managing the tides to care about your heartbreak. Sometimes a priest stops by to teach you just enough hieroglyphs to write "Pharaoh shines like Ra" or "I dreamed of lotus blossoms." Any more than that is risky. Too many words can lead to ideas, and ideas can lead to opinions, and no one wants that. You're also drilled in mythology, specifically how to compare the pharaoh to various gods without accidentally mixing up the pantheon and starting a scandal. Because in the palace, your mind isn't for questions, it's for clever illusions. And if you're clever enough to hide how clever you are, you might just survive long enough to be noticed. Anubis is strength. Thoth is wisdom. Ra is power. Never confuse them unless you want to be remembered forever as that girl who accidentally called the pharaoh a jackal. At the end of every lesson, you're quizzed. Not formally, of course, quizzed Test it through sly little questions like, if the king asked your favorite god, what would you say? Correct answer is whichever one he reminds me of. Your education won't prepare you for life beyond these walls. But if the pharaoh ever wants a song, a poem, or a perfectly timed compliment, you'll be ready. More or less. And once you've recited enough tragic poetry to qualify as a sentimental statue, it's time for refinement drills, daily training to ensure you move like smoke, smile like a goddess, and never, ever trip over your own feet in front of royalty. First up, walking practice. Yes, walking. Something you mastered around age 2, or so you thought. In the harem, walking isn't transportation, it's theater. You're expected to drift across marble floors, as if your feet barely acknowledge gravity. Fortunately, your sandals are slick, the floors are polished to a mirror shine, and there's always at least one girl silently praying you'll wipe out spectacularly to help your instructor balances a clay jug of water on your head. The goal: walk the length of the corridor without spilling a drop or developing a permanent neck cramp. Every step is a fragile negotiation between dignity and physics. Once you've made it without drowning yourself, it's time for dance drills. You and the others form a line and sway like river reeds, but more enticing. Arms up, hips fluid, but not too fluid. You're meant to tempt, not scandalize. You mimic the temple dancer's movements, praying no one notices your right foot, staging a rebellion. Stakes earn you constructive criticism, which is really just criticism. You're stiff, says one instructor. Your rhythm falters, says another. You nod sweetly, while imagining stabbing your own shadow with a hairpin. Next comes gesture training. Concubines do not point. They extend. They do not wave. They fan. Every movement must appear effortless, even when your arms go numb and your carefully layered perfume is starting to fade. Then you practice kneeling, devout but not desperate. The secret, apparently, is all in the eyebrow angle. And finally, voice lessons. How to speak softly, slowly, sweetly. You practice saying "my lord" 20 different ways, each layered with meanings that range from "I am humbled by your majesty" to "please stop breathing near me." By the end, you're sweating, sore, and technically accomplished nothing practical, except now you walk prettier. Which, in this palace, is everything. When the day's balancing, bowing, and faux-sighing drills are done, you return to the common rooms, the ancient Egyptian version of a break room. If that break room were filled with silk-draped women locked in silent warfare over eye contact and seating arrangements, here, gossip isn't just a pastime, it's survival. Some girls get ahead through dance, some through smiles, are the most dangerous ones. They know everything, okay? And they know who doesn't. You settle near a circle of women threading beads. The conversation starts innocently enough, something about which servant dropped a fruit bowl in front of the royal scribe. Within minutes, it shifts. Who got new jewelry? Who slipped out of the astrologer's chamber looking far too pleased? It's been mysteriously quiet since last week's sandal fitting. Names are rarely spoken aloud, only hinted at. The tall one with the heavy perfume. The girl who always looks like she's about to sneeze. Everyone nods. Everyone knows the senior concubines don't waste breath on chit-chat. They listen, 'cause real gossip isn't just delicious, it's currency. Knowing the pharaoh prefers honeyed wine to date wine, that's leverage. Knowing which priest his mother distrusts, that's insurance. You contribute just enough. Say too little, you're forgettable, okay? Say too much, and you might accidentally insult Bastet and find yourself reassigned to folding ceremonial napkins forever. Savious. Concubines keep coded wax tablets, not diaries, tactical ledgers, a secret spreadsheet of betrayals, rivalries, and who coughed during the harp solo. Then there's the double gossip, when someone tells you a secret about someone who already whispered that same secret to you. That's when the real chess begins. You never gossip about the pharaoh directly. That's suicide. But gossiping about each other, that's practically public service. By the end of an hour, you've learned more than any poetry class could teach, and you've locked eyes with 3 future rivals. Success. After a morning of posturing, powdering, and palace espionage, you move on to the grand finale. The long, exquisite wait to maybe, possibly, be summoned by the pharaoh. He probably won't come. He's busy overseeing irrigation canals, inspecting construction projects, or being serenaded by court musicians with names like Hinu the Flagellant. But that doesn't matter. You still have to look like he might. You're led to the waiting chamber, a gilded room perfumed with incense and crowded with cushions. Dozens of women sit in one of 3 approved poses, serene yet alluring, restful yet radiant, and unmistakably pretending not to care. You pick a spot by the window so the light hits your cheekbones, just so. Not that you practice that in the mirror or anything. Servant enters. Heads tilt. Is she here to summon someone? No, she's just refilling the fruit bowl. Still, for one delicious moment, hope flutters through the air. You adjust your pose, just in case your great placement might tip the scales of destiny. Every 15 minutes, you shift positions, not for comfort. Comfort is treasonous. But to keep your limbs from falling asleep, so you can glide like moonlight, if called. You practice looking surprised, yet gracious, should your name ever be spoken aloud. Some girls hum softly. Others read love poems they wrote themselves, both brave and tragic. One girl plucks her lute, like she's serenading fate itself. You sip your wine, pretend not to judge, and silently rewrite her lyrics for better rhyme hours. Pass. A breeze stirs the linen curtains. Oh. Somewhere down the corridor, a sandal slaps a stone. Silence falls. A heartbeat of hope. Then, nothing, to someone heading to the latrine. You exhale with polite disappointment, while your soul lets out a tiny, muffled scream. At last, a servant appears and calls someone else's name. A ripple of forced delight spreads through the room. You smile like you're thrilled for her. She drifts past, smug and barefoot, smelling of rose oil and victory. You're left with your thoughts, your carefully draped limbs, and the stale scent of dashed hopes. He didn't visit today, but maybe tomorrow. See, wait. Beautiful, poised, forever prepared for a man who probably doesn't remember the sound of your voice. If the pharaoh's harem were a garden, it wouldn't be a tranquil lotus pond from some poet's scroll. It's a perfectly trimmed hedge maze full of perfumed tigers. Everyone here is lovely, but power doesn't come from beauty alone. Everyone's beautiful. The real power comes from surviving it. That's the entry fee, beauty. But what actually counts? Alliances, influence, and the ability to say, you look radiant, while thinking, may your eyeliner melt in the sun. Some girls cluster into tight little cliques, loyal satellites orbiting. Whichever lucky one had a confirmed evening audience last week. These circles are gossip clubs, spy rings, and living chessboards rolled into one. Joining is like marrying into a minor noble house. You gain protection, borrowed status, and lifelong suspicion. Then there are the floaters, like you, the quiet ones who smile at everyone and trust no one. You listen more than you speak. You compliment more than you confess. And you always pretend you didn't hear what you definitely heard. Smiling is your sharpest tool. There's the polite smile, the supportive smile, the passive-aggressive smile, canned, the thank you for that completely unnecessary comment smile. You rotate them like a seasoned diplomat balancing a tray of poisoned figs. The senior concubines have mastered what you've come to think of as the invisible war, where no insults are spoken aloud, but entire ambitions are gutted by compliments, delivered with surgical precision. Of course, she was chosen. The pharaoh has always liked women who look so maternal. Occasionally, a new girl tries sincerity. She opens up, shares a secret, asks for advice. By breakfast, she's been emotionally flattened and reminded that in this place, honesty is an expensive hobby, so you learn. Neutrality is an art. Form. Compliment one woman too often, and you're her shadow. Compliment two, and you're a traitor. Compliment none, and you're cold. Safer to compliment the palace cat, honestly, and through it all, you smile, because smiling buys time. Smiling disguises doubt. Smiling convinces everyone, including you, that you're still in the game, even when you're just another piece being quietly nudged across the board. Nothing changes. The temperature of the harem, quite like the sudden appearance of the great royal wife. A title that means, yes, you're all lovely, but my jewelry rides in its own chariot. She doesn't visit often. She doesn't need to. Her presence lingers like frankincense and suppressed ambition. When she does appear, the air shifts. Conversation dies mid-sentence. Figs freeze halfway to painted lips. Ankles are crossed, posture corrected, eyes cast politely downward. You don't hear her coming. You feel her like a silk-wrapped sandstorm. She's older than most of you, which in harem years means she survived what you're still surviving. Kohl is darker, her headdress higher, her smile a masterpiece of regal threat. Okay? She sweeps the room with a glance, catching eyes, seeing everything. Who's trembling, who's scheming, who sobbed in the baths last week. She rarely speaks directly. She doesn't need to. Single line, terrifyingly. Vague is enough. I trust the younger women are behaving with wisdom. No names, no accusations. Just the suggestion alone causes 3 girls to break out in a cold sweat. You offer your most respectful smile, the one you reserve for women, okay, who could have you reassigned to chamber pot duty without blinking. She nods. Perfect. Today, you are beneath her notice, which is a victory. Some try to impress her repositioning flowers, retelling a myth, murmuring praise for her anklet, as though it were a sacred relic. She humors them. She's seen it all. She was you once, but she played the game better, and she won. Then, as suddenly as she arrived, she glides away in a rustle of gold and silk. No one breathes for 10 seconds. Then, conversations resume, softer now, careful. The queen has reminded everyone what real power looks like. As the sun slips behind the palace walls and spills gold across the Nile, the air in the harem shifts again. Care retied, hair retied, linen straightened, 'cause with dusk comes possibility and its cruel sister. Maybe tonight you've spent the whole day being polished, powdered, and perfectly polite. Now you wait again, but this time the tension hums sharper. This is no longer about being seen. This is about being chosen. Maybe the pharaoh will send for someone. Maybe not. The only guarantee is the hush of silk and the faint perfume of rose oil and ambition. The youngest girls pretend not to care, humming harp melodies, sighing about dreams that involve royal cobras and sudden marriage. The older ones, seasoned, sharper, simply sip their wine and smile at nothing. You do what clever women have always done at dusk in Egypt. You smile vaguely and pretend you aren't rehearsing your surprised but delighted reaction in your head. A servant appears. Everyone stills. Names are never shouted. They're whispered like a sacred promise. If it's yours, you rise gracefully, as if this wasn't the only thing you've thought about all day. If it's not, you keep your face pleasant and your wine steady, even though it suddenly tastes like disappointment. Tonight, it's not your name. So you smile, nod, and offer a gracious look to the girl who was called. Even as your confidence slips under a cushion to quietly cry, the ritual continues. You remove your jewelry, unpaint your face, bathe again, this time not to wash off dust, but hope. You slip into your night linen and curl onto your mat, pretending the quiet comforts you. Above, the moon hangs full and indifferent. Somewhere, a flute drifts through the palace corridors. Maybe tomorrow, you whisper to yourself, Because that's what keeps you here. Not certainty, but the exquisite torture of not knowing. And so the palace drifts into hush. The oil lamps gutter low. The harem enters its strangest realm, dreamtime, where ambitions slip their collars and reality excuses itself politely. You lie awake on your mat, staring at the linen fluttering above you like a lazy ghost. Round you, murmurs of half-sleep swirl, girls sharing visions of strange gods and talking birds and walking on lotus petals. It's poetic. It's also only half sane. But here's the trick. Dreams matter. A well-timed vision can lift your standing faster than all the scented oil in Thebes. Get the symbols right, and you're not just another concubine. You're a vessel of divine wisdom. Get them wrong, and you're the girl who claimed Ra told her to lead a poetry recital. You keep your own dream scroll, cracked papyrus hidden under your mattress, scribbled notes. Flooded courtyard equals emotional repression. Pharaoh smiled, then turned into a fish equals. If you ever find a priest fond of riddles, this could be your ladder up, or at least to a better seat at breakfast. Sometimes dreams are borrowed or invented. One girl claimed she saw the queen offer her lotus blossoms in sleep. Everyone knows she didn't, but now she's part of the queen's embroidery circle. That's the power of fabricated dreams, deniable and useful. You dream too of rising, of having your own estate, of whispering counsel the pharaoh actually hears. Sometimes you dream of leaving altogether, but then you remember, outside are fields, sandstorms, and husbands who chew with their mouths open. Inside, at least, there's the illusion of possibility. You roll over and whisper your latest vision to your friend, a cat walking backward, offering you a crown. Okay, she nods solemnly. Definitely Bastet, she says. Power's coming. Key, both pretend to believe it, because here, dreams are currency. Papyrus is cheap. Hope, however absurd, is the only luxury that's free. By your 14th bath and 29th fig, you start to wonder what freedom even means. It's a word you hear whispered sometimes by the older women, usually after too much wine. They stare at the distant hills and say things like, I remember when I could walk to the market alone. Or, once I picked my own hair oil. You nod, trying to imagine a life where your biggest decision wasn't which incense to wear at dusk. On paper, your life is unimaginable luxury. Silk, music, sweet wine, food that never has to be scavenged. In reality, you have fewer choices than a basket of lentils. Want to leave? Adorable. You belong to the palace now. Not a prisoner? Not exactly. But try stepping past the guards with your coal smudged and see how far you get. Want to marry? Only if the pharaoh forgets you exist long enough to set you free, which feels less like rejection and more like parole. Want to speak your mind? Only in a love song or a soft prayer for the Nile to rise. Your opinions are as ornamental as your bracelets, beautiful, but never meant to be useful. And yet, in this well-stitched cage, some women find a stranger, freedom, not physical, but subtle. Influence over which poem gets recited, which priest is summoned, which cousin whispers what rumor at court. It's not much, but it's something. You think of the girl you were barefoot, sunburned, chasing goats through dust, with free in the can walked outside sense. But now you're free in the can make 3 noble houses tremble sense. Which is better? You're not sure, but you know one thing. Here, freedom isn't given, it's performed. Okay. And the better your performance, the less anyone asks whether you're free at all. One day, you won't be here anymore. But tonight, you are. And tomorrow, well, maybe tomorrow, your name will be whispered. Maybe tomorrow, the door opens for you. And until then, you dream. Maybe one day, you'll be replaced, traded for someone younger, with shinier hair and a sweeter singing voice. Maybe the pharaoh will tire of silk and scent altogether and take up falconry full time. Or maybe you'll be quietly reassigned to a country villa, where you'll sip weak wine and remember the night you almost got summoned but didn't, all because the queen's cousin had a headache. And then comes the real question, the one no one asks out loud. Will anyone remember you? There won't be a statue. Statues are for gods, generals, and men who invented clever new plows. Maybe your name ends up scribbled in some palace ledger. Line 34, extra lotus oil for concubine, name illegible. That's your grand mark on history. The scribes won't write songs unless you die young and beautifully beside a fountain, and even then, someone else will probably get the credit. Still, you hope the queen remembers you as the one with the steady hands, or as the girl who never flinched when the cold brush came too close. You hope one of the younger girls mimics your posture years from now without knowing why. Maybe a servant will whisper, "She once made the pharaoh laugh." Except that single laugh changed the shape of a reign. Maybe that's all legacy really is, a handful of moments drifting through someone else's afternoon. But sometimes, on those nights when the air tastes like myrrh and the moon hits the courtyard, just so, you let yourself imagine more. Maybe your name ends up hidden in a forgotten scroll. Maybe, centuries later, a scholar stumbles across it and wonders who you were. Maybe they mispronounce it, publish a theory, slap it on a museum plaque under flickering lights. Still, it's something, because you were here. You outlasted rivals. You learned posture, deception, poetry, and silence in 5 languages. You turned obedience into performance and hope into a strategy. You lived in a palace, even if it never really belonged to you. And in a world where most women never stepped beyond their village's mud brick walls. You became a rumor in the House of Kings. Maybe that's not immortality, but it's close enough. And then, far from the pharaoh's harem, in another palace, in another century, on another continent, there was a different stage for duty and display. The feast is over. The music has faded. The nobles have loosened their belts and kicked off their shoes. But for the bride and groom, the most humiliating and crucial part of the day is just beginning. In medieval Europe, a marriage wasn't sealed with a kiss. It was sealed with witnesses, sheets, and a crowd that turned the marriage bed into a public courtroom. Sex wasn't private. It was political. A noble family needed heirs. Heirs needed proof. So, after the wedding feast, the whole clan, or at least the nosiest, most powerful chunk of it, would escort the couple to bed. And they didn't stop at the door. They stepped right in. If you were lucky, they'd just remove your shoes, toast you with wine, and sing a bawdy song before leaving you to it. If you weren't, they'd linger. Some would watch you undress. Some would inspect the sheets before and after. A bishop or midwife might be there to verify. A good bedding wasn't about romance. It was about evidence. Marriages were contracts. A noblewoman's virginity was political currency. A nobleman's performance was a legal obligation. Without consummation, the union could be annulled. Without witnesses, it was just rumor and hope. Never mind if the bride trembled. Never mind if the groom was drunk or the pair were practical strangers. What mattered was that someone saw or claimed to see the moment when flesh sealed the alliance. The bedding ceremony was a final public contract. The couple's private life began as spectacle. Their first night together wasn't about affection. It was about producing heirs, or at least the bloodstain that proved they'd tried. Once the feast ended, the newlyweds weren't given privacy. They were given an entourage: servants, kin, priests, minstrels, a whole jostling parade. The groom might be half-carried, red-faced from wine or dread. The bride, pale and silent, surrounded by older women whose job was to keep her modest or keep her from bolting. This wasn't a gentle send-off. It was medieval hazing, wrapped in holy blessing. In France, they called it the charivari, a raucous, mocking serenade meant to embarrass the couple into doing their duty at the bedchamber. Stripping began. Layers of silk peeled away by laughing friends and stone-faced matrons. Each garment removed was a symbol. Childhood gone, autonomy gone. What was left belonged to the family alliance. Sometimes a priest gave a final blessing over the sheets, as if holiness could disinfect the awkwardness, but the witnesses might not leave. Some stayed behind the curtains, pressed ears to the door. Some peeked through cracks. For nobles, this wasn't an option. It was an obligation. Proof of consummation mattered more than any vow. Not every wedding night reached these absurd heights. Peasants might get a rowdy escort, a few crude jokes, then privacy. But for kings and high-born heirs, failure to perform meant disaster. No bedding, no heirs, no alliance, no alliance, no land. No land, no power, and the worst part, morning. At dawn, the newlyweds didn't wake to soft words and sunlight. They woke to inspection. The bed was the courtroom. A sheet was the verdict. Midwife or trusted relative would check for blood, the so-called proof of virtue. Never mind that medicine has long known virginity is not so tidy. In the medieval mind, no blood meant no honor. No honor meant fraud. Fraud meant annulment. So the woman bore the risk. If the sheets betrayed her, or if her husband's nerves, wine, or cruelty failed them both, she could be humiliated, questioned, examined, even accused of witchcraft. The groom might face shame too, but it was the bride who would carry the stain, or lack of one. A noble bed wasn't comfort. It was a stage, a battlefield of bloodlines and bodies. The pressure was brutal, the fear unforgettable, the scars deeper than any cut. So next time you picture a medieval wedding night as a candlelit, rose petal, fantasy, remember the crowd, the chants, the watching eyes. Remember the girl beneath the embroidered covers, her heart pounding as she realized that here, even the most private moment was never truly her own. Because, in the end, the ceremony didn't end at the altar. It ended in that cold bed, with everyone waiting to see what story the sheets would tell. But even if the sheet passed inspection, the ordeal wasn't over. The newlyweds still had to face the morning and the court. Servants would sweep in with breakfast on trays, smirking behind polite bows. Imagine sitting up bleary-eyed, trying to sip watered-down wine, while nobles hover nearby, whispering judgments about your night's performance. In villages, peasants might greet the couple with lewd songs, crude jokes, or awkward fertility dances. Think hangover wrapped in forced applause. No matter your rank, the unspoken question was the Sim, did you do it? More importantly, did you do it correctly? And the gossip, unstoppable. Servants talked. Relatives whispered. Even the priest might slip a sly remark into his sermon. One stray glance or careless comment could feed rumors for years. Not every wedding night ended with blood-stained sheets and satisfied in-laws. Sometimes things went badly, and in the rigid machinery of medieval society, a failed bedding ceremony wasn't just awkward, it was catastrophic. First, the dreaded non-consummation. The groom couldn't perform nerves, drink, or simple inexperience. The consequences were swift. Whispers started before the couple even emerged from the room. A red-faced groom was humiliating a tearful, untouched bride. Worse, by breakfast. Rumors were already seeping through the castle walls. When powerful families had political alliances on the line, they couldn't risk ambiguity. The prince couldn't consummate. It wasn't just a bedroom problem. It was a dynastic crisis. Courts summoned midwives, physicians, even priests to test the groom's virility. In France and England, there were actual court cases demanding a groom prove his manhood publicly. One unlucky nobleman in the 16th century endured a full investigation, witnesses, testimony, physical exams, all because his bride claimed nothing had happened. On the bride's side, failure to bleed could brand her a fraud. Truth didn't matter, reputation did. Some desperate brides faked it, pricking fingers or smuggling animal blood into the bed. Risky, but sometimes the only way to survive the scrutiny, and if the evidence fell short, annulment. No consummation meant the church could declare the marriage invalid. Dowry returned. Alliance is broken. The bride labeled damaged goods. For noble women, that might mean exile to a convent. For peasants, public shame. Sometimes worse, a furious groom, desperate to salvage his honor, might accuse his wife of witchcraft, deception, or adultery. Women were beaten, imprisoned, even executed, all because of a failed performance. What was supposed to bind two people could, instead, unravel entire families. And yet, across medieval Europe, this ritual unfolded with strange local twists. In Scandinavia, brides were sometimes carried upside down across the threshold, symbolizing the passage from maiden to wife. In rural villages, the groom's friends might sabotage the bedding, locking him out of the chamber or banging pots outside, just to make things more awkward. In Germany, some villages turned the bedding into a bed race, a wheeled bed dragged through muddy streets, while neighbors banged pans and laughed. The louder the noise, the better noise chased away evil spirits and modesty. In Ireland, the ritual stopped at the door, but older women might hover nearby with fertility charms and unsolicited opinions about the bride's hips. France made it legal theater. Royal couples sometimes signed official documents in bed, the clergy looming nearby to sanctify the act. In Spain, the ritual dripped with Catholic symbolism. A crucifix nailed over the bed, prayers whispered before. Passion, optional. Peasants had it easier. A torchlit parade, some rude songs, a few knocks on the shutters mid-act for good measure. Privacy? No. Communal entertainment? Absolutely. No matter the country, the bedding ceremony wasn't really for the couple. It was for the family, the village, the church, and the law. The awkwardness was universal. This was a ritual of contradictions. Sacred, yet crude. Formal, yet farcical. Deadly serious, yet weirdly comedic. Beneath it ran a current of unspoken truths. Everyone knew the groom might panic. Masculinity was prized, but not every boy came to the bedchamber with swagger or skill. Flame fell on nerves, wine, or even witchcraft. Wives were told to be patient, discreet, or both. The bride might sob or plead behind the curtains. These were taboo whispers carried by mothers and midwives, but never spoken in court. And then came the humor, because where there's terror, there's always a joke. Friends swapped the groom's robe for a woman's gown. They hid chamber pots under the covers. Some tied bells to the bed to broadcast the moment. Priests offered blessings laced with double meanings. May this union bear fruit in due season. Delivered with a wink. Behind the stiff rituals lurked secret strategies. A nervous groom might hire a prostitute weeks before to rehearse. A terrified bride might swallow secret herbs to dull the pain. Midwives kept discreet toolkits of scented oils and whispered tricks passed down like forbidden recipes. So beneath the pageantry was fear, farce, survival, all playing out on the same creaking bed. One night to prove your worth, your purity, your virility, and secure your family's future. And when dawn broke, if the ceremony failed, it could bring ruin. But if it succeeded, it was still just the beginning. And if you lived in medieval Europe and survived the wedding night, congratulations, but don't smile too wide, 'cause in this world, your teeth were on their own. No toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no clue about bacteria. The mouth was just another hole in your face. If something went wrong in there, you prayed to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothache, and gritted your rotting teeth. Your diet didn't help. Coarse bread ground with gritty millstones scraped enamel to dust. Meat was salted or stale. Vegetables boiled to mush. Sugar was rare, but decay came anyway. By your 20s, your smile probably looked like a ruined graveyard, crooked, yellow, and missing half its residents. A cavity didn't get cleaned. It festered. Pain bloomed from dull ache to fiery agony. Infection could swell your jaw, cloud your mind, and, worst of all, kill you. Yes, a toothache could be fatal. A rotten molar could poison your blood or rot into your brain. But no one knew that. If you died, they blamed sin, not bacteria. Remedies, useless at best, dangerous at worst. Maybe someone gave you mashed herbs. If you were rich, you rinsed with honey and vinegar, sweet, acidic, and completely futile. Some folk healers advised pressing a hot poker to your cheek to draw out the evil humors. Good luck with that. Eventually, someone, your mother, your priest, the village wise woman, said the dreaded words, "It has to come out." That was the medieval dental plan. Extraction, not healing. Yank it. Hope for the best. And who did? Pulling the local barber surgeon, the multitasker of medieval pain. He'd cut your hair, lance your boils, amputate your leg, rip out your tooth, all before lunch. Barber surgeons weren't university trained. They didn't study anatomy with monks or read Galen by candlelight. They learned by doing sharpening blades and keeping patients alive long enough to pay. The tools: iron, forceps, long-handled pliers, rusty hooks, bare fingers, sterilization. Not a chance. Maybe he wiped the tool on his apron. Maybe he didn't. There was no anesthetic. You got a shot of bad wine or a leather strap to bite. Then you sat or were held down and hoped he was quick. Some barbers were masters of speed, others not so much. If your tooth shattered mid-pull, they'd dig out the roots with a hook. Patients screamed, fainted, or bit through their own lips. Sometimes they were tied to chairs to stop flailing. Still, people lined up, 'cause the agony of an infected tooth was worse than anything the barber's pliers could do. Barber surgeons built reputations off this misery. Some toured villages like grim celebrities, displaying extracted teeth nailed to posts as proof of skill, or proof you weren't dead yet. Complaints? None. If you botched it, who would you tell? There was no dental board. Some people did try to care for their teeth, sort of. Used tooth powder, a gritty mix of crushed bones, ashes, burnt bread, or oyster shells, medieval sandpaper for your mouth. The wealthy added mint, sage, or imported spices to hide the stink of decay. Brushing was done with a rag, a finger, or, if you were fancy, a twig brush bristling with hog hair. They didn't understand germs. The goal wasn't to kill bacteria, just scrape away, rot, and mask the stench. Some texts suggest to stuffing cavities with honey, antimicrobial, yes, but pure sugar. So, congratulations, you soothed the pain and fed the decay. Other folk cures were bizarre. Powdered mouse skulls, boiled dog's milk, even urine rinses were pitched as toothache fixes. Desperate people tried them all. When they failed, they turned to magic. Some wore charms etched with Latin gibberish. Some burned henbane seeds and inhaled the smoke to chase out imaginary toothworms gnawing inside their jaws. The church walked a strange line. Monks offered herbal balms and prayers. St. Apollonia's image appeared in pockets in parish walls. The martyr who lost her teeth so you might keep yours. Holy relics, a saint's bone fragment, a sliver of the true cross were pressed to swollen cheeks. And if that failed, well, you probably died spiritually pure, if nothing else. Pain in the medieval world was expected. Something to be endured, not soothed. Tooth extraction was a public spectacle of agony. No quiet clinics, no numbing gel, no gentle ocean sounds. It's just a shaky chair, a blood-stained apron, and a prayer you didn't faint. If you were lucky, the barber got it on the first pull. If not, he'd keep digging. Cross-contamination, non-existent. Okay? One patient's infected blood might greet the next patient's open mouth without so much as a rinse. Okay? The idea that germs spread. Disease hadn't been born yet, so the medieval mouth was a battlefield infection on one side, superstition on the other, with your jaw stuck in the middle. If the wedding bed didn't break you, the barber surgeon's pliers just might. And still, life carried on. Because when the pain was all you knew, you didn't complain, you opened wide. And if you were unlucky enough to get a festering abscess after a tooth was ripped out, well, back in the chair you'd go, this time begging for someone to lance the swelling with a knife heated over a fire. Why didn't more people just grit their teeth and endure the agony? 'Cause the pain of doing nothing could turn even the bravest soul into a whimpering wreck. And in an age when prayer, honey, or ground-up bone dust offered no real cure, brute force was the only solution left. Okay? Wasn't an accident. It was part of the deal. No numbing, no apologies. Just steel tools, raw nerve, and a bucket for the blood. Not every medieval dental nightmare happened in a dingy back room either. Some of the loudest shrieks echoed right in the village square, between the goose cellar and the sausage stand. That's where the traveling tooth pullers plied their trade. Not trained healers, but flashy showmen, drifting from fair to fair, market to market. They wore flamboyant hats, brandished oversized pliers like trophies, and promised to cure anything, from toothache to heartbreak. Credentials. Some flashed fake scrolls covered in Latin nobody could read. Others swore their tools were holy relics dipped in gold leaf. Nonsense, but convincing enough. Their game was simple. Draw a crowd, put on a show, and yank some teeth. They'd start with a booming pitch about their gentle touch and miraculous cures. Sometimes they'd plant an assistant, a volunteer who pretended to suffer and then was miraculously healed. The real show began when the next poor soul stepped forward, genuinely in pain and desperate for relief. The puller would clamp down, rip the tooth free for all to see, and lift it high like a trophy. Blood was part of the show. Screaming was proof the work was real. Once the tooth was out, the showman turned salesman, hawking bottles of herbal potions, clothes-soaked rags, or mystery powders to keep the rot at bay. Half wine, half spice, and wholly useless, but they sold the fantasy of aftercare. The toothless limped home lighter by a tooth and a few coins. The crowd left entertained, and the tooth puller packed up, richer than he'd arrived. Some were decent at their grim craft. Others left behind trails of broken teeth, torn lips, and lawsuits, if lawsuits had been a thing back then. Love them or hate them, these tooth pullers filled the gap. When no barber surgeon worked nearby and the monastery was days away, they were medieval dentistries, answered to a quick fix, cheap, messy, and impossible to forget. So next time you leaned back in a plush chair, eyes on your dentist's gleaming tools, remember you could be sitting on a wobbly stool in a muddy square, surrounded by chickens, while a man in a feathered hat waves your molar like a prize dot. And if you think royal, blood guaranteed, a better experience, think again. Medieval kings and queens might have glittered with gold and jewels, but their teeth were just as rotten, sometimes worse. More food didn't mean better food. Nobles feasted on sweetmeats, candied fruits, white bread, and wine, a cavity's dream menu. Sugar was rare, an exotic luxury from the East, but when it arrived in noble kitchens, it was dumped into pies, stews, and pastries without restraint. The result? Broad cavities and breath strong enough to drop a horse. Records show that royals suffered mightily. King Henry VI's teeth were black and loose. Catherine de' Medici endured rotting teeth and chronic bad breath, chewing cloves day and night to mask the stench. Noble ladies had it worse. Fashion demanded pale skin, tiny waists, and a mouth that stayed firmly shut. Smiling was risky. It revealed the battlefield behind the lips. The aristocrats had barber surgeons on call, but that mostly meant the same brutal extractions, just done by someone wearing finer clothes. Queen Elizabeth I famously dreaded dental work so much that one of her bishops had a tooth yanked in front of her to prove it wasn't that bad. She still refused until the rot reached her jaw. Vanity led to other disasters. Some nobles powdered their teeth with lead-based pastes to fake a white smile, poisoning themselves in the process. Others chewed perfumed lozenges to disguise foul breath. Mouth perfume, basically. No wonder so many royal romances played out in letters rather than whispered secrets. Look at old portraits. Few smiles. Not just an artistic choice, okay? Practical. 1. If your teeth looked like shattered gravestones, you kept your lips shut tight, while the spectacle of tooth pullers stole the headlines. Everyday people clung to strange habits and half-true remedies. Toothbrushes, not exactly. Afraid. Sticks from aromatic trees, hazel, juniper, mallow, worked as crude scrubbing tools with a hint of flavor. Better than leaving bits of roast goose wedged between your molars for a week. Mouth rinses were popular. 2. Vinegar, wine, even warm urine, all believed to cleanse the mouth and chase away evil humors. Monks scribbled recipes for mouthwashes. Boiled red wine, cloves, sage, spicy, slightly antiseptic, barely effective. Some believed in wilder cures. Rubbed crushed emeralds on your teeth to keep them white. Kiss a donkey to pass your pain into its braying mouth, or wedge a spider's web into a sore tooth to trap the ache. The spider probably had other opinions. Bad breath was more than unpleasant. It was seen as a sign of moral decay, so people chewed fennel, anise, cloves, anything to freshen their breath for church or court. The irony, many chewed sweet nuts and honeyed treats that rotted their teeth faster than they could spit prayers for forgiveness. Children learned early that tooth pain was God's punishment for lying or greed. Some wore tiny charms, bones, coral, scraps of parchment meant to protect new teeth coming in. By the late medieval era, mouths across Europe were wrecked, but cracks of change were forming. Few curious souls or madmen wondered if there might be a better way than just ripping teeth out. Arabic medical texts by scholars like Avicenna and Al-Zarawi spread ideas about anatomy and oral care that went beyond bone, dust, and barber's pliers. Monks kept detailed notes, tracked which patients survived, refined herbal rinses. Brutal trial and error, but trial and error nonetheless. By the 14th and 15th centuries, barber surgeons were splitting off into new paths. A few specialized in surgery, and a handful began to focus just on teeth. The first real tooth specialists. They weren't respected, and they weren't licensed, but they were different from the guy shaving your beard. Cities began regulating street pullers. Some were forced to register or move indoors. Public squares slowly cleared of the shrieks and splatters of on-the-spot extractions. Gradually, priorities shifted from spectacle to sanitation, or at least the medieval version of it, which mostly meant rinsing your hands in wine and hoping the gods approved. People feared ugly teeth more than the pain itself. White teeth became a new symbol of status and beauty. Nobles polished their enamel with coral paste. Smiles, tight-lipped, but present, began to reappear in paintings. True modern dentistry drills, fillings, anesthesia was still centuries away, but the seeds were planted. The days of pliers under torchlight, chickens clucking around your feet while a man in a feathered cap held up your bloody molar, those days were numbered. So next time you sit back in a clean, numbed chair, mouth open under bright lights, remember, your comfort is built on centuries of pulled teeth, half-baked cures, and raw survival. Somehow, humanity clung to its smile, battered, bloody, and still here. After a day or two, dead fresh mare's milk turned sour and fizzy, morphing into a cloudy, slightly alcoholic drink with a sharp kick strong enough to lift the spirits of a weary rider on the endless steppe. Unlike vodka, it wasn't distilled or purified. It was raw, alive with wild bacteria that would horrify any modern health inspector. But for the Mongols, it was life itself. Eerie did everything. It quenched thirst, packed precious calories, and offered a buzz that sharpened the mind instead of dulling it. In the sweltering summers, it cooled you down. In the frozen winters, it warmed you from within. Cased, it flowed freely. During tense negotiations, it was served with a bow and a smile. Refusing, it was not just rude, but a grave insult. Guests arriving at a Mongol camp would be handed a shallow silver bowl of eerie before they'd even sit down. You were expected to sip, even if the taste, half smoky vinegar, half yogurt gone rogue, shocked your tongue. Foreign travelers often wrote about its punch, tart, pungent, and utterly unforgettable. But to the Mongols, this frothing, sour brew was sacred. No feast, no festival, no moment of true hospitality was complete without it. Older batches of arak could be distilled into a clear, potent liquor called Arhi Mongol moonshine, stronger and not for the faint-hearted. This harsher spirit had its own uses, toasts, rituals, even medicine when needed. So arak was far more than fermented milk. It was the lifeblood of the steppe, fuel, ritual, and a taste of home that no warrior could go without. To understand, Mongol food is a taste, arak, sour, raw, and impossible to forget. The Mongol army didn't carve an empire stretching from Hungary to Korea on empty stomachs. Their battlefield rations were just as brutal and efficient as their tactics. There were no supply trains, no rolling kitchens. Everything a warrior needed came with him, strapped to his saddle or hidden beneath it, warming gently with every mile. The backbone of this mobile pantry was boards, thin strips of dried mutton or horse meat left to harden in the dry steppe air until they turned tough and leathery. A primitive jerky, unseasoned but nearly indestructible. One handful could fuel a man for an entire day. Could chew it raw or toss it into boiling water for a quick, greasy soup. But meat alone didn't keep an army charging across continents. Its fat was just as vital. Rendered mutton fat was mixed with flour or dried curds to make dense cakes or dumplings heavy, juicy, and loaded with enough calories to power a rider at full gallop for days. These hearty snacks didn't spoil, crumble, or melt. Warrior could stash one in his sleeve or saddlebag and gnaw on it days later. In harsh weather, boiled bone broth gave extra warmth and strength, a rich, oily stock made from simmering bones and scraps. Sometimes heated with stones, dropped straight into a pot. For longer rides, soldiers would toss bits of boards into a leathered flask with water and let it soak as they rode. By nightfall, they had a ready-made stew, no campfire needed. If all else failed, the Mongols had one last grim trick. A small cut on a horse's neck. A mouthful of warm blood, and both horse and rider pressed on, still alive. There were no fancy sauces, no spices, no side dishes. Mongol warrior food wasn't about pleasure. It was survival in its rawest form, stripped down, caloried and supped, and unstoppable. When the raids paused and the warriors returned to their families, life shifted back inside the gird, the sturdy felt yurt that anchored nomadic life. A ger was more than shelter. It was a portable fortress designed to defy the howling winds of the plains. Its door always faced south. The hearth burned in the center, and the kitchen, if you could call it that, it's a few iron pots dangling over the fire, fueled by wood, dry dung, or fat. Food was the domain of the women, who didn't follow recipes. They followed instinct and necessity. The simplest, most common method was boiling. Chunks of meat, generous slabs of fat, maybe some fermented milk, all tossed into a pot to simmer into a hearty broth. No spices, except a pinch of precious salt if they had it. One special dish was budog, a whole, deboned marmot, or goat stuffed with hot stones, sewn shut, and cooked from the inside out. It's primitive, smoky, and theatrical, and unmistakably Mongol. Milk was precious too. In summer, it was churned into yogurt, curds, and cheese, eaten fresh or dried rock hard into roux. It's tough, it could crack your teeth, but so nutritious that kids gnawed on them like candy. Meals were communal affairs, eaten seated on the ground, fingers dipping into shared bowls. Meat passed hand to hand, broth slurped straight from the bowl. Knives were wiped on sleeves, scraps thrown to the dogs. Nothing wasted. The Gare kitchen was survival's beating heart, a place where a family, always on the move, could feel briefly rooted out on the endless steppe. Food was fuel. But in the lavish courts of the Khans, food became power. The same warriors who lived on dried meat and fermented milk transformed into patrons of extravagant feasts when they sat beneath silk canopies in cities like Karakoram or Xanadu. Under Kublai Khan, the empire's kitchen expanded as wildly as its borders. Cooks came from Persia, China, India, each bringing their own spices, methods, and secrets. A Mongol imperial feast was a spectacular contrast to the bare-bones life on horseback. Spit-roasted lambs, whole birds stuffed with herbs, delicate Chinese dumplings, fragrant Persian stews brimming with dates, nuts, and saffron. Sometimes even Indian spices made it to the table, carried by Silk Road traders: fennel, cumin, pepper, and always the drinks: endless Iraq, sweet wines from the Caucasus, rice liquor from China, distilled arhi for those who dared. Gold and silver cups passed around while singers, dancers, and trained animals entertained the court. The centerpiece was always meat, towers of it, sometimes sculpted into shapes of horses or dragons, a testament to both abundance and authority. Feeding so lavishly showed that if you could feed this court, you could feed an empire. And yet, old steppe values remained. Mutton shared space with delicacies, and bowls of humble broth opened and closed the feast, reminders that the greatest empire on earth was still born from the open plains. But the true genius of Mongol food lay in what it did beyond the table. Food was diplomacy. A bowl of steaming broth or a sip of bubbling eerie could seal an alliance faster than any treaty scroll. Foreign envoys knew you didn't meet a Khan before you ate at his table. You didn't speak of trade or tribute until you drank his arag. Refuse it, and you might as well declare war. More than one European delegation saw talks collapse because they recoiled from the sour, frothy milk that was the pride of the steppe. Those who respected the ritual reaped the rewards. Merchants who brought exotic gifts, Persian dates, Baghdad spices, Armenian wine, often found safe passage, lucrative deals, or trading rights in return. The Mongols loved novelty, but only if offered with deference. But Mongol feast was never just a meal. It was a test, a performance, and a reminder that under the felt of a humble Gare or the silk of a royal court, the steppe's wild spirit always simmered, sour, smoky, and stronger than any empire. Marriages, military pacts, and new vassals were sealed not with signatures alone, but with long tables groaning under heaps of lamb, ribs, and steaming bowls of boiled dumplings. To eat heartily wasn't just good manners, it was proof you were strong enough to live under Mongol rule. The meal itself could be a subtle test. A guest served a choice shoulder cut knew they were honored. One given rump meat understood their lesser standing. A rich bowl of broth spoke of respect. Thin milk, bare minimum courtesy. In the Mongol world, diplomacy began with your teeth. To survive it, you had to know when to chew, when to toast, and when to nod politely with a mouthful of greasy fat. For a nomadic people, forever moving across a harsh, unforgiving landscape, preserving food wasn't just wise, it was life or death. With no permanent pantries, cellars, or markets, the Mongols had to make their food portable, durable, and nearly immortal, using nothing but wind, sun, smoke, salt, and hard-earned. No dash how, that air dash drying meat was the iconic technique. Mutton or horse meat was sliced into slender strips and strung between yurts or saddles to let the cold, dry steppe winds do the work. In days, the flesh turned into boards, tough, lightweight protein strips that could last months, even years. Boards could be chewed like jerky, ground into powder for quick soups, or folded into dough for dumplings. It was survival in its purest, its leanest form, perfect for warriors racing across the Gobi or deep behind enemy lines. Dairy, too, was preserved with ingenuity. Fresh milk was churned into butter, then clarified and stored as blocks of fat. Yogurt was strained and dried into roux, rock-hard curds, tough enough to crack a tooth, but nutritious enough to gnaw like candy. These weren't snacks. They were edible insurance, vital when hunts failed or winters dragged on mercilessly. Fermentation worked its magic too. Mare's milk became the famous airag, but cow, goat, kay, and sheep milk were turned into yogurts and sour creams, stored in skin bags or clay pots. These fermented products were naturally acidic, resistant to spoilage, and loaded with healthy bacteria, though the Mongols didn't know about probiotics, only that it worked. Where rivers or forests allowed, salt, curing, and smoking came into play. Fish were smoked and strapped to saddles. Organ meats were boiled and sealed in fat, an early form of confit that kept meat edible far beyond its natural shelf life. Storage was clever in mobile leather bags, felt-trapped bundles, queued, even hollowed-out animal stomachs doubled as food containers. Saddlebags were pantry and pack horse all at once. Koi jars, no glass bottles, just practical, rugged solutions that could be thrown on a horse and forgotten until hunger struck again. The Mongols mastered the art of turning food into portable survival plane. It's powerful and unstoppable. Yet, food for the Mongols was more than calories. It was ritual, superstition, and a measure of your place in the world. Tangrism, the ancient steppe faith, shaped how they hunted, cooked, and ate. Animals weren't just meat on legs, okay? They were sacred givers of life, okay? Every part of a kill had a purpose, and waste was an insult not only to nature, but to the spirits that watched over the camp. Blood, while life-saving in battle, was taboo inside the yurt. Domestic bloodshed was unclean. Butchering was done outside with solemn care, and meat was shared to maintain harmony. The hearth inside the ger was sacred. No one threw bones into the fire, swore near it, or stepped over it. To do so was to offend the spirits and invite ruin, not just on yourself, but on everyone under that felt roof. Some foods were strictly avoided. Dog meat was taboo, unlike in some neighboring cultures. Fish, though plentiful in Mongolia's rivers and lakes, was rarely eaten. Water was a pathway for spirits, and disturbing it risked drawing their anger. Even leftovers carried spiritual weight. Eaten bones were buried or fed to animals. Liquids weren't dumped onto sacred ground or tossed into the flames. Every scrap had its place and its consequence. Hospitality, meanwhile, was practically a religion in itself. Denying a guest, even a stranger, food or drink was shameful, almost sacrilegious. A teen, share meat and milk was to share survival, and in the vast, empty wilds of the steppe. That hospitality might mean the difference between life and death when storms closed in. In Mongol culture, every bite mattered, a bond of survival, spirit, and honor that held the world together. Though the empire eventually crumbled, Mongol foodways galloped far beyond the steppes, leaving traces in kitchens from Eastern Europe to China, the Middle East, to Siberia. As the Mongol hordes swept across continents, stood their simple but powerful ideas about food, practical, portable, and meat-centered. Dumplings, for example, still bear their mark. From booze in Mongolia to manti in Central Asia, pelmeni in Russia, and baozi in China. These stuffed pockets echoed the same concept: ground meat wrapped in dough, quick to cook, easy to carry, and able to feed many at once. Fermented dairy left a legacy too. The tang of sour milk drinks like kefir in the Caucasus or ayran in Turkey can be traced back to the steppe herder's genius for preserving milk on the move. The belief that sour milk gave strength and stamina never faded. It just adapted. Even today, travelers across Central Asia might be handed a cup of pungent, fizzy fermented milk, a direct descendant of AIRAG. Meat-heavy stews and skewers, Uyghur lamb kebabs, Siberian game soups still carried the DNA of those rough, fire-boiled meals once prepared inside gears. The absence of spices, the focus on fat, the minimal grains, all remnants of a life spent on horseback, never rooted long enough to sow a field. Even Persian chelo kebab, now rich with spices and rice, has its roots in the metanistic feasts popularized during Mongol rule in China. The Yuan dynasty, under Kublai Khan, turned imperial kitchens into culinary crossroads. Recipes from Persia, India, and the steppe blended into imperial banquets that left their mark on Ming cuisine, layering Central Asian broths and stews into the hot pots we see today. But perhaps the greatest Mongol culinary legacy is the idea that food is power. The Mongols taught the world that what you feed your warriors, your allies, and even your enemies can build kingdoms or break them. They proved a man could live off dried ports and sour milk and still conquer half the known world today. The taste of the Mongol Empire lingers on in echoes, in the tang of yogurt, the stretch of dumpling dough, the hiss of lamb fat over coals. You just have to know where to look and be brave enough to take a bite.